Hi, this is Elisabeth Hancock, host of the Great Awakening podcast. And this week we've got the amazing Guy Anderson back on our show. And as you know, he is a conspiracy theorist, but a massive researcher on things like Tartaria, cloning. He's got 2 books out about Tartaria cloning. He's also got this amazing A to Z encyclopedia of everything, if you want to have answers about what's going on in our world at the moment. So I hand it over to you. Hi, Guy. Thank you for
Hi,
joining.
Elizabeth. It's a pleasure. It's lovely to see you again.
It's great to have you back. It is. And I love your work. You just deep dive into things so deep, and it's amazing all the research you do, how you find your information. I know that you were part of the Freemasons for years, weren't you? Did you get a lot of information from there? Is that what sort of, sparked all of this?
I joined them because I thought I would get a lot of information. Because in my teens, my dad kept telling me that he was off to a lodge meeting and he'd have his morning suit on and his oversized briefcase. And my mum used to joke, saying, because she'd seen what was inside his case and I hadn't, she'd seen his apron. And she used to joke, saying that he was off to bake cakes with his friends in his little boys' club. And he always used to say the same thing when he walked out the door. He'd say, you can laugh as much as you like, they run the world. And that was it for me. I wanted to know what he knew. So when I was ready, I joined myself, but a different lodge to my dad because he'd stopped going. He'd used it to accelerate his career. He was on the board of directors for a big PLC in the city. And I watched his career grow from being a sales rep out on the roads for an industrial paint manufacturer to literally within 5 years being on the main board of directors. And I knew that although he's a very intelligent man and very ambitious, I knew something else was involved there. So I joined. Fortunately, the lodge that invited me met at the United Kingdom headquarters for Freemasonry in Great Queen Street in London. Unlike my dad, who joined a London lodge, I was really at the hub. And what I learnt from that was corruption, a bit about King Solomon and ancient architecture and stonemasons, which was useful now, but it wasn't at the time, and where that knowledge came from. But I also understood more about how the government operates and the voting process in particular, because our secretary was David Cameron's advisor for the Metropolitan Police. So I was given information on what happens when we vote and how they put prime ministers and presidents in place through the Bilderberg Group. I had that firsthand, but I never learnt what I thought I would because I got to 3rd degree, which is Master Freemason, where most people get to. And beyond that, there was too much work involved. Unlikely I was ever going to reach 33rd because I didn't have the right connections. I was a tattoo artist of no use to them other than my attendance and enthusiasm and paying my fees and raising a bit of money for charity. But I knew it was a closed shop to really find out what I wanted. So in the end, I stopped going. And then I started actually talking about it on Facebook. And then I realised that when I saw certain people unfriend me, that I was no longer welcome anymore. But it certainly helped me have a better understanding of how the government works. It confirmed my suspicions. And I did gain information and knowledge on King Solomon's temple and sacred geometry. I did gain knowledge from that, but most of my information comes from those. I've been
Yeah.
collecting old books and encyclopedias for a long time, and I've got a few books that were included in the books that were supposed to be burnt. I've actually managed to get hold of a couple of those, so I have information that I shouldn't have. Well, that's wrong. We should all have it.
Yes, yes, and books shouldn't be burned. Yes.
Well, that's where Kindle comes in, isn't it? That's why they called the Kindle books Kindle, because they can change what the author wrote without the
Yes.
author ever knowing, and it represents burning books.
Yeah.
Kindle for starting a fire.
Oh my God, word magic. They drive me bonkers, honestly. But I know that you and I have the same passion, which drives us, which is what the heck is going on? Who are these bloody people and why are they doing it? How are they even allowed to do any of this? If you consider like universal laws, I think they just, you know, they stamp on universal laws, which makes me think that there aren't any universal laws. It's just incredible, isn't it? Just absolutely incredible. And I know that we both researched the Anunnaki and things like this. But today we're going to be talking about how the old world architecture is created, is formed, is built. And I know, just you talking about the Freemasons, I know that, the Masons, they are supposed to be part of the building of the old world architecture. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, it goes back to Atlantis. So the knowledge that they shared on sacred geometry was passed down, and then it ended with someone called Hiram Abiff. Hiram Abiff was the chief architect for King Solomon, who built the temple, and he started the Freemasons. And the reason when you see Freemasons going to a lodge meeting that they wear mourning suits is because they're in permanent mourning for Hiram Abiff, because he refused to give the information to three what they call ruffians. They're actually called the three Jews, not as in Judaism, but they were all called Julian. So it's Jues, and that was symbolic with Jack the Ripper. There was graffiti on a wall at one of the murder scenes, and they wrote, "It's the three Jews that will not be blamed for anything." And it was symbolic to show that the Jack the Ripper, which we know was a member of the royal family, but it was Masonic, and that was showing you that it was ritualism that was being conducted by the Freemasons. So these three ruffians, as they call them, they approached Hiram Abiff. They asked him for information, and he refused to hand it over. They wanted to become part of his group, which was the beginning of Freemasonry, where you started as an apprentice, and then you slowly progressed, and you were given more knowledge on sacred geometry. The more you learnt and understood, and you would progress up the ladder to the 33rd degree ultimately. When he refused to give them the information, they killed him. And because we say when we join the Freemasons that, and I'm saying we, obviously I don't go anymore, but when you join, you say that you won't share certain things, passwords, the handshake and so on, which they actually refer to as a grip or a token. You promise that you won't share that. And if you do, then years ago, allegedly, they would cut your tongue out and they would tie you to a post in the Thames when the tide is out. And as it comes in without your tongue, you're unable to cry for help, so you drown. And you make a solemn vow to not share that information because, the person that founded Freemasonry died to protect that knowledge. And that's why they wear the mourning suit.
Okay. I always felt that there was some good in the Freemasonry. I felt like, it was trying to pass down sacred knowledge, which I do feel it should only be in the hands of people who are going to use it well. I can definitely see that the secretness behind it is sort of warranted. You don't want sort of people going out there taking this knowledge and using it to destroy the world. Of course, what we've got now, because it was all infiltrated. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, you're exactly right. There are three types of people that join. There are people that join because they want to understand more. They want to learn what was Freemasonry about, what is this knowledge that was shared and handed down, and they want to progress through the ranks to gain more what we would call occulted knowledge. There are people that join because they like the charitable side of it and they want to get involved in raising money. It's typically for children's wards in hospitals. And then there are people that join because they want to use it to progress their career or maybe get their kid into a better school, get off with speeding, that kind of thing. So there are people that use it for the right reasons and there are people that use it to really abuse it. And you've got a real mixed bag. Somebody said to me, a very high-ranking Freemason who had the keys to the City of London, he was very well respected. He was the person that actually proposed me to join that particular lodge, and I'm friends with his son, who was a former gold medalist Olympian called Derek Redmond. He said to me, when I put my apron on, when I became a Freemason, I put my apron on and he said to me, "One thing I will tell you, that apron will not change who you are. If you are a CUNT now, you'll just be a CUNT with an apron. It will not change the person." And I never forgot that. He also very rarely swore, and he was very passionate when he said that to me. And obviously, understanding what that word means, which is someone you hold in high contempt, it resonated with me, and I never forgot that. People will use it for the wrong reasons. It's got a bad rap. Most people that join are not nefarious at all. I met some really lovely people, but once you get higher up, that's when everything changes because, like you said, the Jesuits infiltrated these societies, along with the Illuminati, and that's where everything started to become nefarious.
Yeah, I always felt that. So let's go back to this old world architecture. I was thinking, let's just discuss the Jesuits, and I thought, no, let's not. Let's go back to the old world architecture. And so all roads lead to Atlantis, don't they? Everything goes back to Atlantis. This was obviously our previous civilization. It's very hard for me to wrap my head around it being 12,000 years old, although it could be. I suspect that the Atlanteans, they went into inner Earth and back out again, and they went on to, like the Indo-Aryans, Slav-Aryans, Tartarians, and they created that sort of, society. So we have that sort of Tartarian society. They had the Atlantean, the techniques of how to create the old world architecture. So let's have a discussion about how they did this, because we can see this old world architecture all around us. We don't know how to build it. The Freemasons possibly do, but we don't know how to build it. And, they're busy destroying it. So, let's look at that. How did they build it? And then we'll look at why they're destroying it.
Your information and your knowledge is perfectly researched. I would say that's pretty much exactly what happened. I've traced Atlantis through my own research and through information that's been shared with me to an event that involved, it appears to be a nuclear attack. So there was some kind of, not necessarily nuclear, but that kind of level of catastrophic event that was caused. So, we're told that the gods didn't like the arrogance of the Atlanteans, that they had gone from being a civilization that lived in a higher vibration, a higher frequency, that had a stronger connection to the source, and then the arrogance set in and they became greedy, and everything became a kind of almost a complete contradiction to their original purpose and meaning. But it looks like, as you quite rightly said, some of them went underground and became what we know as the Tartarians. But there were also people that were kind of your regular civilians that didn't have this sacred knowledge. They just lived within Atlantis and were part of the infrastructure and the peoples. And they are the RH negative bloodline. And you can actually watch the pattern. If you look at where Plato suggested Atlantis was, and then you look at where the RH negative populations kind of were even still today more prevalent, you've got them in the direct of where you would go if you were fleeing somewhere by sea and heading for land. So you've got them coming into Ireland and then southern Scotland on the west coast. You've then got the Basque region, and then you've got Africa as well. And you can literally draw lines from where Atlantis was to these three locations, perhaps the most popular being the Basque region of Spain, where they all have a high population of blonde and red hair with green or blue eyes and RH negative blood. And there is no sensible narrative for why these people are where they are located. But when you look at Atlantis, where it was suggested to have been, and you follow, if you were in a boat, and you're pointing to the nearest land, it is these three particular areas that you would reach first. So it looks like that's where the people escaped to, but the elders with the knowledge, I do believe, went to land and then underground. And I think that is what became the Tartarian and perhaps even Hyperborea. But some people suggest Hyperborea predates Atlantis, but of course we just don't know that.
I think Hyperborea is inner Earth. So I've been researching it at the moment. I'm putting together a new YouTube video for it, actually. So, I've been looking at Blavatsky's work, Steiner. I look at, all the sort of esoteric stuff and then try and look at the physical stuff as well. But yeah, I think so. Inner Earth, it's not this sort of solid land that we think. It looks very different to surface Earth, or the surface Earth that we possibly created. And, I'm reading at the moment the John B. Leith book, which is Genesis of the Space Race. And he talks a lot about the Admiral Byrd expeditions. And on one of the expeditions, this may be Admiral Byrd, it may be one of the US military, but they actually fly into the South Pole, fly up and out the North Pole. And, they sort of talk about how it's a massive sort of like hole in there. The Earth is like this donut, this toroid shape. When Admiral Byrd was flying over the North Pole, he just said that it just goes down. There's just this massive deep hole that goes down. The sea goes down as well. And it's showing us that Earth reality is, there's an element to it that we really don't understand, you know. And I feel like maybe we've become stuck in this very physical 3D way of looking at stuff. You know, we're in a very one-dimensional, narrow sort of level of consciousness, and we were out before in a higher level of consciousness, or a more expanded level of consciousness, where we were able to perceive reality or connect with reality in a different way. And I think that's what the gods are as well. But yeah, anyway, so, you know, let's go back to how they built the old world architecture. So I know that you had this information that comes through the Freemasons, which is very interesting how you look at it, because you're saying that they created concrete, so they were able to make concrete.
Yes, yes. So but for a long time, people have wondered where the stone and brick came from to build these incredible structures. And people have searched for the local quarry, evidence that there was some mass production of brick going on, huge kilns. And of course, that would also involve a lot of trees, a lot of wood being needed. You know, where have they cleared forests to fire up the furnaces to make to make bricks and so on? And that led me down a path thinking, well, I don't believe they actually did dig and quarry for these stones, because there isn't any evidence to suggest that. And whether you're looking at Penn Station, Buckingham Palace, wherever you look, even the Vatican, we can't find any evidence to show us where the actual stone came from, where the materials were sourced. So that led me looking into Roman cement and then geopolymers. And then I digressed slightly and I started looking at the ivory required for all of the pianos that were made during the 1800s. And in just the 1850s, they would have needed 3 million elephants to provide the ivory. So I then looked for mass graves, evidence of 3 million elephants within just a 10-year period being sort of, well, let's be honest, being slaughtered, for want of a better word. Where are the remains? And I couldn't find anything. So I then started looking into the possibility that they were able to reproduce ivory and stone and other materials to such a high quality that it's almost indistinguishable from the real thing. And then I started digging further, and that's where I am right now. It looks as though they were actually able to make these blocks and bricks and other products like ivory, synthetic ivory, for example, on site.
And marble, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. I think that they were able to liquefy something that's very similar to marble, or liquefy marble itself, and that is what's used to coat these statues that we see that appear a little bit too realistic. And I found some in the Louvre in Paris that had bones sticking out where the limbs had snapped off. I could actually see an arm bone and also bones within fingers and toes that shouldn't have been there. So I think that they were able to achieve that, and clearly had a far higher understanding of physics and chemistry and perhaps alchemy than we are led to believe. So that coincided with a video that John Levi put out on YouTube that had a Sears catalogue in it that was showing you that you could buy this little machine from the Sears catalogue 100 years ago that enabled you to make bricks yourself, to pour certain liquids in and materials in and actually produce bricks yourself. And you could buy this little device from the Sears catalogue. So I think that that's what they were doing, that they were actually using specific materials. I then looked into what they were doing in Russia, and that again looks like they were selecting certain chemicals and certain materials to produce bricks that were able to store energy, electricity, these particular red bricks. And then I stumbled across an old document that was shared with someone who claimed to be the last Tartarian that worked on these buildings. And on his deathbed, he gave his life story, if you like, to his grandson, who then wrote everything down. He passed it to his daughter. She moved to Canada, and someone came across it in an estate sale in Canada, bought it, and then I ended up with the information too. And it described in there how they made the bricks, how they selected them, and also how they made the domes on the buildings. He had all of the blueprints his father had given to him before he died. And unfortunately, his father was taken away and executed because he'd shared this information with other people too. But yeah, so I ended up with all of that, and it really helped me with this particular line of inquiry to understand the knowledge that they had when it came to the materials they were using and why they selected certain chemicals and certain ores for their properties, what they were looking to achieve from that. So it wasn't just, going to a quarry and producing blocks of marble and granite and so on, and limestone.
Yeah, I can see that. And that sort of materialization and dematerialization, that was something I wrote about in my second book, because you can see that on the polygonal walls in South America. You can see it on some of the structures in Egypt, the structure of the temples in Egypt. You can see where they've sort of scooped it, like ice cream. And, you look at it and you think, well, that they must have been able to dematerialize it. And as you say, then that leads us on to physics, physics, advanced technology. And alchemy, of course, was the first science. And I think from what I've been researching about alchemy, they could do a lot more than we currently know. Bridget Knapp, one of the Tartarian conference speakers, she was telling me about the Hutchinson effect, where he was able to essentially dematerialize metal, so change metal into jelly by accident. And then I started researching that. So we can see this information is coming back. And
Yes.
for me, I meditate and I download this information. It's there, it's out there, it's in the field. We can download all of this stuff. But I know that that's being targeted as well. The telepathic, sort of information that I know is coming through. The CIA is blocking all of this, putting in fake stuff, which to me shows that there's another level to all of this. It's not just what we see. There is another level, an energetic level to all of this, which is where I really start to think, okay, if there's an energetic level to the world, then how does that change, the old world architecture and our past and the previous civilization? Atlantis, I think all the information that we have now is all coming back. It's all stuff we had in Atlantis. Everything, we had all of this in Atlantis. It was a very high level civilization in terms of technology, and this information is coming back. So you talked before about, that the gods, they don't want us to have this, they're wiping out civilizations. Do you think that may be because we're abusing it, maybe, and so we're not able to have that level of information because we're abusing and we're warring with it? Or is there some sort of more nefarious element to it?
I think that it's true that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Power corrupts absolutely. And I think that that's the case with everything from Atlantis to what we see right now with the parasites that are still running this Hollywood blockbuster. So I don't think that we can. Somebody actually said the other day, when I put a post up about something, I can't even remember what it was, but I remember someone's comment, and they said, "What a vile civilization us human beings are." And I said that you can't say that because the majority of people are good. Some people do bad things. Sometimes they do them for, in their mind, the right reason. And that could be how we perceive a law, for example. So someone may go and steal something, and then they're arrested for theft and so on. But it could have been because they have no food on the table to feed their children with. So, your perception of good and bad depends on the situation, I think. So I do honestly believe that most people have good in them, but it's the people that are running the show that don't. And I think each time that has been the catalyst for what's unraveled. So, with Atlantis, we're told that it was corruption and arrogance that led to it being destroyed. But that's surely going to be the people that were in positions of power, perhaps wealth, that may have been financial, monetary, or in a different guise. But certainly the people that were in charge appear to have been corrupt or became corrupted. And that's the same today, isn't it? That there are probably a number of people that go into politics because they want to change the system, or join the police because they want to do the right thing. But along the way, they become corrupted, and then they're just the same as everybody else. So I think it's the power and the greed that leads to corruption. And that has a knock-on effect on everybody else. So you could wipe out an entire civilization based upon the actions of the 1%. And I think that is what's has taken place. But of course, we are the ones that take the hardest hit, because it would appear, and it's happening right now, that these people know what they are doing, these parasites. They know that they're causing a problem, and that there may be a price to pay ultimately for what they've done. It looks like when that's approaching, they go underground, and they're building bunkers right now. So I think that they know something's coming, that they've tipped the scales in the wrong way, and that there's going to be an ultimate price to pay, and that could be us being wiped out again.
Yeah, so they know that we get wiped out whenever we abuse too much, that the balance becomes too great. So I was in a presentation by a local MP, and he was saying a lot of things which I'm sure he probably shouldn't have said, and I won't go into too much detail, but he's worked in politics for 10 years, and he said he's watched people go in with the best intentions. 10 years later, they've been sucked down, and he calls it Luciferian. They're Luciferians. It's satanic. It's, all this sort of ritual and stuff, which makes me think that they're doing this stuff on purpose. They're actually calling in negative entities, demons, using them for more power, knowing that when the world gets wiped out, because they've done that and they shouldn't have done it, that they'll go underground and then come back out again. And I suspect that's what's happened previously, because my research also discovered that. But it seems to me like, what is the point of that? What is the point of just keep worshipping demons, and it just keeps being wiped out. And it makes me wonder, who are these people, and how do they start out good and then they become so corrupt that they actually have lost their soul? And he said he looks in these people's eyes, they have no soul anymore. They are not human anymore. What is it that's behind the shadows, behind the scenes, that just keeps doing this? And we've got archons and the Nagamadi texts. We've got the black goo making the minds of the scientists go mad who started studying it. We've got the AI, we've got this space and all these sorts of things. I know, what are your thoughts on this?
You've hit on some really interesting subjects there. The first one, I'm going to try and remember them all, because there are a few different things there. The first one is Member of Parliament. Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that people over the years have referred to male genitalia as being the male member. Parliament, of course, is to lie to the mind. So if you want, for want of a better expression, you've got a prick lying to people. So I don't think that that's a coincidence. I really don't. And like with Freemasonry, people join, and I said earlier on about the police as well. People join, a lot of people join with the very best of intentions. They're going to change the world. And Andrew Bridgen is probably one of the few people that I've spoken to that was offered a bribe for his silence during the pandemic, refused to take it, and then was financially ruined as a direct result, even resulting in his divorce. So, if you're not going to follow their rules, there's a price to pay. And we see that in Hollywood with people selling their soul, and those that refuse to play ball once they've done so, coming to an untimely demise. So we know that happens, that if you want to stay in the game, or you want to get higher up the rung, then you've got to follow their rules. And I think that that's where it starts to become quite sinister. So if you imagine Epstein, for example, let's say that he invites an up-and-coming tech guru to one of his parties on the island, and they ply them with alcohol and perhaps spike their drinks. Before long, they're doing something that they wouldn't normally even contemplate, and it's being recorded. Now you've got people watching them doing that without the person actually committing that nefarious act knowing what they're doing, but you've got other people watching it, and I believe that there's an element of one-upmanship going on. Well, if they're going to do that to that person, watch what I can do, trying to impress people like Gates and Musk and Branson that are there, and Trump, let's be honest, 56,000 times he's mentioned, so it's pretty obvious he was involved. So you've got all of these powerful people and some up-and-coming people that have perhaps made their money through tech or whatever, and then the new kids on the block, and they want to be seen and respected and perhaps considered to be prepared to go even further than anybody else. I think there's probably an element of that going on too. Then with regard to the Luciferians, it's a strange one, isn't it, Lucifer? Because if you actually look into Lucifer, what are we actually talking about there? Because this is somebody that came down to give knowledge. You know, that this was someone who fell out with God because they didn't agree with what God had done to man. And when they shared that knowledge with Adam and Eve, that this person or being appears to have been trying to do the right thing. So why have they got this bad rap? And why are they considered to be the morning star, which also is
Venus.
Jesus is represented and considered to be the morning star. So
Yeah.
what really is Lucifer? So I personally disassociate Lucifer with Satan and anything satanic because there isn't a strong enough connection there. And the more you look into Lucifer, the less likely it appears that this is the demon. I think that this has been perhaps bastardized and contorted, but nevertheless, we have got this satanic group of people. Now, I don't know if there is a devil or a god. I don't know. I think there are supreme beings, beings that are far more intelligent than us and have been around for a very, very long time. But I do believe, whether there is a devil or not, or demonic entities, that these parasites believe there are. So it doesn't matter really whether they exist or not. I do believe that these parasites actually worship something that may or may not even exist.
They're creating.
Yeah, and this is where the whole loosh farm theory comes in. But who are they worshipping? Are they actually following a script? Are they just doing something to convince us indirectly that they're satanic, but knowing actually ultimately there isn't anything there to worship? You know, where did this all come from? Because you can even throw Baphomet into it. Some people say they're worshipping Baphomet, and that's the higher levels of Freemasonry and the Knights Templar do. The Knights Templar definitely worship Baphomet, but Baphomet has two sides to it. One is it's this demonic entity, and the other is that it isn't that at all. And it actually represents, you know, as above, so below. You know, that dark and light, that it's a representation of everything. So we don't even know that because so much has been twisted and contorted. And if you look at the Statue of Liberty, that's been altered to suggest it's Lucifer breaking free of its chains as we enter Satan's little season. Again, associating Lucifer with Satan. But that is not in the Bible. That doesn't appear to be what Lucifer really was. And the stories of Lucifer are that he was this incredibly handsome man, or a man originally, or angel, and beautiful. People actually described him as being beautiful, and that he was trying to do the right thing. Well, that mirrors the story of Enlil, who didn't agree with what Enki had done.
Enki was a geneticist.
Yes, that created us.
Enlil is supposed to be Yahweh, and I got that from Mauro Baglini, his work. So he links Enlil with Yahweh, and Enki was the trickster.
No, it looks like Enki towards the end, he, you know, from what I've read, had relationships with us, with the you know, Homo sapiens that he created. And of course the Igigi did, and that's where we get the Cyclops and the giants and so on from. But from my research, Enki was ultimately the scientist responsible for taking Neanderthal man and making us as this slave race. And Enlil was the one that objected.
Yes, Enlil objected. So he didn't want the humans to have their intelligence, consciousness, you know, foresight, whatever. You know, he didn't want Homo sapien to have the foresight of the gods. So we've got a lower level of consciousness, a less expanded, you know, sort of consciousness. Whereas the gods, they can see more, and we don't have that.
Yes, we were designed to be a representation of them, but without the level of intelligence and ability. Yeah, so we were made in their image, but without the knowledge. So that's Janet's his niece that produced that, and she's saying that Enlil was basically who we're describing as Lucifer, that came along and said that Enki made you. I didn't agree with it. He shouldn't have done what he did. And you're being played because you have a lot more ability than you're aware of, and you've been suppressed, and you are a kind of monster. You shouldn't exist. You are unnatural, and then shared information with them, and then fell out with Enki, and they had this constant rivalry. Yet at the same time, after floods, they both appear to kind of help humanity. But in some traditions, it's just Enki that comes from the water or the sky to say to the the survivors, I'm going to help you rebuild civilization. And in other texts, it's the pair of them that arrive. But more often than not, it is just Enki that they're referring to, who had fallen in love with a human and had children. And obviously that's where Gilgamesh comes into it all. He appeared, in my mind, to be the Lucifer figure that we see in the Old Testament.
Maybe. I never felt that Enlil was as bad as the bad press he gets. I feel like he gets blamed for everything. I don't think Enki is particularly great either. I think Enlil was possibly more reserved, and as you say, he didn't sort of integrate with the human population so much because he felt it wasn't right. I think what you're saying is correct. I never heard him being compared to Lucifer. What I did find recently is the link between the Numu of the Dogon stories, the Dogon tribe, and the Anunnaki.
Yes.
And that one is fascinating. I've done a few videos on that because it's really showing that the Numu, I don't think that they meant to create anything bad. I think that they were looking to create a physical form to house their DNA, to house their spirit, their soul. And what I really get coming through from all the different texts, the physical form, the biological form was created to house the soul. And the soul was a spiritual form. And they came from the Pleiades, the spiritual Pleiades. And what they didn't understand was that the biological and the spiritual did not mix. And so when they created this form, they then spent thousands of years trying to undo. They created a jackal. And essentially the jackal was more mortal and devoid of soul and spirit, and I think this, to me, this sounds like the parasites that we have today. So, and you can see this jackal coming through a lot, which is very interesting. The jackal essentially can never understand spirit. It can never understand soul, and of course that to me that's the Catholic Church, that's the Vatican, that's the Spanish Inquisition. When we talk about spirit and spiritual things, to them it's like madness and they want to just kill it and stamp it out. And that sounds to me like the parasites, actually.
I totally agree with you. I think Charles put it best when he got engaged to Diana and they were interviewed by the press and they asked her what it was like to be in love. And she was clearly in love with Charles, perhaps for the wrong reasons, maybe, but you could see that she wasn't doing this for any particular reason other than the fact she had fallen in love with him for whatever reason. And when they asked him the same question, he said, well, whatever love is. Now, there are two arguments there. One is that he was brought up not really knowing what love is due to the way in which they conduct themselves and they expect their family to behave, especially in public, and sending the children off to school where they appear to have a rather unpleasant time. But also, I believe that they are not capable of love. They're not capable of empathy or being creative in any way, shape or form because they lack that soul as we describe it. They lack that connection. They lack the ability to love and the ability to express themselves. So I think if we are vessels, which I believe we are a vessel for our energy or our soul, and that our body is giving us the ability to experience life in a physical form, and when this physical form comes to an end, that us, our soul, our being, our aura, our consciousness continues because it's energy ultimately, and you can't stop energy. You can't kill it dead. It goes on and on and on. I think that they are negative energy and we are positive energy. I think that that's symbolic within all sorts of things, perhaps more so within politics than anything else, and also the judicial system where we are considered to be energy. Again, that tips into the Loosh farm theory. So I do believe that these negative beings that we refer to as parasites are different to us, completely detached from us, and they don't understand our ability to love, care or have compassion, and they see us as kind of vermin to an extent, far lesser than they are. You mentioned earlier on about archons. I think that there is a connection between archons and icons, and that we are expected to worship certain people and put them on a pedestal when they have actually no right to be. And I think that that's perhaps key figures within Hollywood, key figures within the government, and also within religion, that we are expected to hold in high regard, and we refer to them as icons when actually they are representing archons in many respects. So I think we've been played and that we are different beings. I challenged ChatGPT months ago. Whenever I ask it something, I give it a set of parameters where it cannot lie and it can't refer to the mainstream. And if it feels compromised, it has to say it's compromised. And then I have to ask it a series of questions where if it says no to something, say, for example, I said, is Prince Charles a human being? And it replied, I can't answer that. Then I would say to it, if he was a human being, would you have said yes? Yes. So
Wow.
that's just as an example. I didn't actually ask it that. I asked about Tony Blair, but as an example, that's how I sort of kind of challenge it. And I said with the parasitic families that we refer to, the Rothschilds and so on, are they the same as us? Are they the same? Are we talking exactly the same DNA? Are we talking a blood group that we're aware of? And after about an hour, it actually referred me to an MI5 document and a chapter within Tony Blair's autobiography. And in there, hidden in plain sight, in a way in which you could easily overlook, it did state that it actually stated in a kind of contorted way that Tony Blair was the Antichrist, that actually is a Rothschild, that everything we know about him is incorrect, including his date of birth and where he's from, that his blood group is one that we are not aware of, and that his DNA was slightly different to ours.
It is so interesting you say that, because I was just about to say, well, as soon as you said Tony Blair, I was just about to say, I think he's the Antichrist. A few months ago now, I was researching him for natural law. So when he came into power, he changed loads of the laws. And, and essentially one of the main laws that he changed, the first thing he changed is that politicians cannot be held for treason. So, and he changed loads and loads of laws. And essentially where we have, what we're in now today, he set all of this in place when he went into power. I think 1997 it was. He is definitely a bad person, but the Antichrist. I can totally see that.
I don't know if you remember at the time, but just before he came into power, there was a smear campaign where people had actually put demonic eyes on his face, removed his eyes and put demonic eyes there.
They felt it too.
Yeah, and of course he's still controlling everything today because, he's on Trump's panel, the peace panel. He's got his own religion, the One World Faith organization, where he's looking to actually start his own religion. And you've got people like Peter Thiel contributing millions of dollars into that. So it looks like he's trying to remove all religion and give everybody an alternative, his alternative, where you can follow his religion. He was the catalyst for the lockdown and the push on vaccination programs. And he's behind, obviously, digital ID too. So he's very much still running the show here. Dolores Cannon said that the third Antichrist would appear on the banks of the River Nile at a particular moment. And at exactly that moment, he and Cherie Blair purchased land on the bank of the River Nile in exactly the same location. So that there is a lot there. So it could be that she was predicting the future, or it could be that he's following predictions. So he appears to be the Antichrist, but certainly from my research, it looks like he is either the Antichrist or representing the Antichrist. Yeah, and the Fabian Society obviously was pushing their agenda as well. Yeah, he very much is in control of the UK. And I think if you probably dig deep enough, you'll find that he's in control of it all.
It doesn't surprise me. I met him once in Manchester. He was opening sports hall or something. Not only does he have foul energy, but you can see he thinks we are all vermin.
No, he's not the same as us. And I think that that's true of them all. And they might change their names along the way. And some people get taken into the fold. If you look at where Trump gets his money from when he's in financial difficulty, as he's been, numerous times over the years. That's filtered from the Rothschilds through Israel. I think that they're ultimately all either related to blood, through blood to the Rothschilds or the other 13 bloodline families. They've married in or they've been taken under the wing of these families. So in return for the financial assistance the Rothschilds gave Trump actually then orchestrates their plans for them, which we're seeing now unfold. So I think that they either put their own blood into positions of power, or they put people into a position where they have to follow their instructions. in exchange for the help and the power that they've been given. And this is kind of where the Bilderberg group comes in. We see these up and coming politicians attend the meeting at the hotel in Holland, and then, would you believe it, within months they're the head of their particular party, and then they end up becoming prime minister or president. And we've seen that play out so many times. This was kind of confirmed to me in the Freemasons. As I said, the secretary of our lodge was David Cameron's advisor for the Met Police, and he actually did tell me precisely what happens when the voting takes place. They're groomed from a young age, they're approached at school, and the MI5 and other agencies approach them as well, and it's from a very young age that actually their career begins. With regard to Boris Johnson becoming the Prime Minister, our secretary was an hour late for the last meeting I attended, and he apologised to everybody because he'd been in a meeting, a government meeting, and he was representing the police, and there were different people from different groups there. And I said, well, what was the meeting about? And this is at a bar, just myself and him talking, and my son, and I'd known him for a very long time. And he said, well, the meeting was deciding who the next prime minister's going to be. And I said, well, I kind of never really truly believed that they counted our votes. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, they never have done. I mean, it's all decided a long time before. I said, all right then, who's the next prime minister going to be? He said, well, it's going to be Boris Johnson. And at the time I thought, really? I didn't actually think that would ever happen, because he's been considered to be this sort of bumbling buffoon. And he said, no, that's who they've put in, and that's exactly what's going to happen. And lo and behold, 6 months later, he was the prime minister. And at that point, I started telling people to stop voting. But even now, people who even tell me that they are awake and fully aware of what's going on and how it all works will say to me, well, I'm not voting for them again this time. I thought, Jesus Christ. They don't count your votes. Even Shakespeare told us that, if voting made a difference, we wouldn't be allowed to do it. This isn't new news. This is old news.
Yes. Well, part of natural law is that the first step is that you take yourself off the electoral register. It's very interesting. And I've actually joined, it's our original law, God's law, which to me proves that it was 1,000 years ago when something shifted here. And it was last used, natural law was last used 963 AD. Now, I don't believe in dates. I do think 1,000 years has been added on, but it's what we have at the moment. So to me, this shows me that we were following that God's law, natural law, and it's a community law. And it's essentially the whole ethos that it's what's good for the people. So, the elders, what we call the politicians today, they worked for the people. And then, that was then disintegrated essentially, but it's still the original law, and it supersedes common law, maritime law, which is where we are today, which is what the parasites have sort of created in order to create the world. But we don't have to be part of their world anymore, see? And I've always felt that because everything is an energy at the end of the day, we can turn our backs on their corrupt systems that they've created. You can't fight their systems. You just end up in prison because they've created it in such a way that there's nothing you can do within that system. So we can just create our own system. And I suspect that there'll be like two worlds running side by side. We've got like the spiritual sort of people who can feel that there's something more than us, there's something bigger than us. And then you've got the devoid of soul and spirit who cannot feel anything. It always makes me think, imagine how scary it would be to think about dying when you cannot believe that there is anything more than just your flesh and bones. And I think that's where they are. And that's why they try and preserve their bodies, trying to figure out how to transfer consciousness and using the adrenochrome to extend their life. And I actually feel sad for them because I don't think that they have got that ability to feel joy in that way, which is quite sad, really.
I totally agree with you. It's one thing that you mentioned about common law, natural law, is that if that was stopped from 963, which is an interesting number in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
From my research, and I've got to say that this isn't me spending years and years researching something to the extent of Anatoly Fomenko. This is me researching Anatoly Fomenko. I've got to 800 years being added to the timeline, but of course with buildings and paintings and documents, it's easier to put an M or a 1 on the front, or tell people that the J was actually how they used to do
Mm.
If 963 was the real year, and the Great Reset took place in 1776, and we remove the 800 years that were added, that takes us to 976 as the start of New World Order. Well,
Wow.
that is dangerously close to those laws becoming, no longer valid, or being replaced ultimately with maritime admiralty and the laws we have now. That's dangerously close to that. So maybe that is the right year,
It's very
because
interesting.
that would have
That's
been
what
one
we're
of the
in.
steps you would need to put in place.
So this is why they have a Bible in all the law courts. It's not to do with religion. It's because the Bible is actually a legally binding document. And the original Bible was essentially how to live by God's law. And of course, the Romans, they just sort of destroyed it and cobbled everything together and created this thing. But it shows that the parasites still have to abide by that. They cannot run the law courts without having that legally binding document, the Bible, in their place, which it shows it's a law that supersedes theirs.
Isn't it interesting that the Bible itself being used in court? Because this comedian, I'm sure you've heard of him, George Carlin, American comedian. He did a bit of a sketch, if you like, on the Bible being used in court, and he said that we're asked to put our right hand on the Bible and swear. What if you put your left hand on it? What if you're blind? What if there are pages missing from the Bible? What if you don't actually put your hand fully on it? What are the implications of these things? We're being asked to put our hand on the Bible and make a pledge, a solemn vow. But what if we've turned the Bible upside down? What if our hand's on the back of the Bible? What if, like I said, there half of it's been torn out? And if I'm blind, and I'm swearing on something I cannot read, then what are the implications there? So I found that quite interesting. And you're right. I mean, they the irony with of course court is that you are being judged, but at the same time you're being asked to swear on a book that clearly states that only God can judge. So what are these people doing?
Playing God.
Exactly. So they actually have no right to judge anybody, and it's a complete contradiction. And I mentioned earlier on about the judicial system, where we're considered to be energy, and there's no greater example of that when we are charged and placed in a cell. We are being shown there that we are a little walking battery, and they want to remove our energy. And this is kind of the Loosh farm theory. And the same applies when we put someone into a power. But when we put them into power by electing them, we're giving them our energy, and we go to a polling station and we have a blue or a red option normally, and that represents the different colours on the old horseshoe magnets. Is it a negative or a positive we're putting in place? And then we've got pole shifts and so on. So it's all very cleverly done. And this, of course, was all introduced by the Phoenicians. Here we are today. And I think it's fantastic that people are going back to natural law, because that does supersede absolutely everything.
There are these massive communities who it's legal law. Many of these different societies are not legal, so they still have to use common law, maritime law, legal frame. This is a complete stannery court system. It has its own legally binding law, so you don't even have to go there with all that other corrupt stuff. It literally is going to be two societies running side by side, I think, at this point, until more people wake up and understand the corruption behind maritime common law, and word magic, essentially, isn't it? It's word.
Yeah, yes, it is. We're tricked all the time. It's funny, I had this conversation with my mother a couple of days ago. She's got what appears to be some sort of respiratory problem. And I know that she's had one too many shots, and she's kept that from me, but told my brother. And she's been having breathing difficulties. And I said to her, is this all the time? And she said, no, it only appears to happen where I live in Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire. And she goes into London quite a lot on the train. And I said to her, well, what's it like when you're walking around London? She said, I'm absolutely fine. And I suggested that she may have a 5G mast near her house that's causing that problem. And she said she will look into it, but she won't. Anyway, to cut a long story short, she went to the doctors, she had a chest x-ray, they've given her antibiotics in case she has an infection that they can't see. And I said, well, the x-ray would have brought up if you had an infection there. And what you've been given translates to against human life.
Yeah.
Antibiotic. It goes against. And I said that they use these terms to trick us, but it's always in plain sight. You know, that we're using these words in everyday language without realizing what we're truly saying. It's like united. You know, start the clues with the first two letters, undo, untie. You know, to united actually breaks down to mean to not belong anywhere. And we use it, don't we? We'll say, I'm from the United. I mean, I don't. I say I live on England. I don't live in England because I haven't built a hole in the ground, you know, and haven't climbed down that. But I don't live within a corporation or a concept or a construct, which is the United Kingdom. But we are often having to fill in forms or tick boxes to say that we are from the UK, and we're not. You know, we do not belong to the King's domain. That's what the United Kingdom means. We do not belong there.
Yes, I agree with that. I've always found it interesting about the British Isles, you know, who are the people here? I mean, the Irish, definitely the Hyperboreans. Blavatsky talked about the Irish were Hyperboreans. And I don't know, I think maybe our Earth is slightly shifted in some way as well. But I mean, anyway, I do find all this fascinating. But what are your thoughts on the old world architecture being grown from the ground? And this is something that I know a few people talked about in our Tartaria conference that we did, and essentially using like frequency resonance to grow it from the motherboard. And I discovered, interestingly, that rocks grow, and I never knew this. On you know, and things can be materialized and dematerialized. You know, it's really showing that what we see as physical is not physical. So what are your thoughts on this sort of growing the buildings out of the motherboard? You know, simulation theory, I suppose.
Yes, the simulation theory. It doesn't resonate with me, but as I said before we hit record, nothing's off the table. It doesn't resonate with me because I don't understand it enough. I'm leaning more towards now these buildings being constructed through actually creating, through mass producing, manufacturing their own material. But there is an argument that this was manifested, that people collectively could manifest these buildings. I'm on the fence, and I'm on the fence because it is something I don't understand enough, and I haven't dug deep enough into it. But I do understand the concept of being able to manifest these buildings, or collectively being able to manifest something. But from my research and the sort of angle I'm coming from, I'm looking more at the practicality of it all
Yes.
and the possibility that actually, as I said earlier on about John Levi's video on the Sears catalogue showing that you could actually buy one of these devices that would make ultimately bricks for you. You'd pour the liquids in and make a brick, that people were ordering them from the Sears catalogue to actually build their own small homes and dwellings. So I'm coming from that angle, that actually they had the ability and the technology to produce on site as many bricks or blocks or stones as they wanted.
Mm.
And with regard to the ornate detail of statues and carvings within these buildings, that they were actually using laser, kind of some sort of laser type device, that these were laser cut or even CNC manufactured.
Okay, laser. Okay, because I've read plaster casts that they're creating plaster casts of these things, and that's how they got, you know, such a like defined quality, level of quality for these statues. Laser, yeah, it's interesting. So do you think that they had cranes and things like this, or were they using wooden ladders, you know, wooden scaffolding?
I think that they were using airships.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that that's how they built these things, and I think that that's how they built the pyramids. I think they've had airships or craft for a very long time, and that they
Yes.
were being used, because there's no way you could use wooden scaffolding to take or hoist up. Because if you think, if you were going to build a crane at the period we're told these buildings were constructed, if you take sort of Notre Dame just as one example, a wooden crane, well, if you look into it, you'd need a wooden crane to build the wooden crane that's required, and it goes on and on and on and on, so
Yeah.
it's not possible. And to hoist something that weighs several tons to the top of Notre Dame on a wooden crane, and then people climb wooden scaffolding and ladders to secure it into place, I don't believe that. If they had an airship or something like that, and they were able to hoist it from there and lower it down, and you had people there to hold it and get it into position. No one's having to carry any weight. And imagine you could be also attached to the airship. So if you were to fall, you're not going to fall very far. You're just going to dangle in the air until they hoist you up. So I think that they were using airships in the construction of these things.
Yeah, so it, you know, just thinking of those, I think it's that cathedral in Germany. You know,
Cologne.
yes, Cologne, exactly. I
Mm.
mean, look at that, you know. that, if anyone said that these buildings are manifested, that definitely looks like something that was manifested, and just sort of grown. It's like all the concrete was laying in the ground, and then, like the sound came out, like boom, like this, and it just sort of grew from the cement up into the sky. It looks like it was created like that. It really does.
But then at the same time, to actually create it from the ground, so the materials, the rock, whatever, then you would end up with a hollow.
I can't understand the science around it. I feel like there's either missing scientific knowledge that we don't have, and I can't download how those buildings were built. And I can't,
blocked.
Yeah, blocked. Yeah. It's really hard to access this information. And I wonder why that is. Maybe we're just not supposed to know that.
Yes, or you're being stopped from
I'm being
able to access that. Yes, because that's perhaps one step too far for us mere mortals to perhaps comprehend in their mind. But we don't know whether or not that's intentional to protect us or intentional to prevent us from knowing the truth.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think that it's actually to protect us. And when you look at the initiations that were carried out with the secret society, that they had these initiations that lasted for ages and ages, and only once the initiate had proven themselves were they allowed to access this certain information. And so that sort of shows that you're the right character. You're only going to use it positively, But again, then I ask myself, well, you can see in Atlantis, we had all this. We can see in Tartaria that we had this. Tartaria is only 300 years ago. So we can see we had this information. So who's blocking us from this information now? And all I can think is that's nefarious reasons.
Yes. You've got to lean towards that, really, haven't you? But I do wonder whether or not that is actually ultimately to protect us. It's a little bit like the pandemic. I don't know if you've heard people with this theory that was actually introduced by the good guys, the white hats, whatever you want to refer to them as. Yeah, so kind of with the objective of seeing who's awake and who isn't, because we can't all go on to the next stage or the next dimension or the next period of time. Who is awake enough to be able to accept the information what we're about to have revealed before our eyes? Is it a possibility? Because there is this sort of, I suppose, consensus of opinion that if a UFO was to land in certain parts of the world, that people would take their guns and go out and fire at it, where in other parts of the world they would greet them with open arms. So what are we able to take on? What information are we able to receive without it completely blowing our own circuit board and sending us perhaps into anarchy or completely the wrong direction? Because you imagine if an advanced civilization landed here and said, we've returned, we are the people that created you. Well, that's religion out the window immediately. Yes. What happens then? They're going to be people that think, well, there's no heaven and hell, I'll just do whatever I like. But
also killing themselves. So in this book I was talking about, Genesis of the Space Race, he said that since 1926 was the first time a Venusian turned up in the president's Oval Office. And so these Venusians, they visited US presidents on 60 different occasions. And they have the ability to be able to walk through doors and materialize, dematerialize, all this sort of thing. And it's, on one occasion, it's astral travel, but on the other occasion, they were put in a prison cell overnight, and they stayed one night and they showed that they drank water, they used the toilet. But then the next night, they essentially disappeared out of the ceiling, into a craft hovering above. Essentially, this guy, I think Mr. Plato, turned up with Roosevelt, told him about the Venusians and the different aliens. And then Roosevelt immediately went to his team and said, right, we've got to tell people that, that these aliens exist. We have to, let people know. And what they then did was they created this film, and they created it to show the world, what would happen if ETs turned up. But essentially they showed this to a group of people, and apparently 8 people immediately went and jumped off the building. They could not handle it. But the other thing is that it then, towards the end of the book, goes on to talk about how in 1980, there were up to 50,000 aliens. And again, it's interesting that they now call immigrants aliens, isn't it? So yes. 50,000 aliens in the US alone, and they come here. 200 come every year. They come and they study at our universities. They do internships in companies. They also come from Inner Earth. So the son of the king of Inner Earth, who this book calls King Hufkanus III, and he's the king of Bodlander. And his son studied here in a university as well. So then they go back to Inner Earth, and the surface populations and the Inner Earth populations have been talking for decades, it seems. And what's more interesting is they talk about how they originally found the entrance to Inner Earth through the mountainous caves around Iran, Syria, and Pakistan. And you think about the Iran, the Iraq and Iran wars that have essentially been going on since the 1940s. And that's when the Germans went down to Inner Earth as well. It's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
I think that we clearly, we're not being given the full story, and I think that's the case for many things. But why, I don't know. I don't think that the people that are running the show, the parasites, want us to understand what we're fully capable of and what our abilities are. But at the same time, as I said, with an alien craft landing that throws religion out of the window, that also discovering that there are aliens here, that they've infiltrated society and been communicating with governments and world leaders for a long time, that completely throws a spanner in the works as well, because it's the same issue with religion, that all of a sudden everything becomes unbelievable, and you would have people that would be petrified. And I think that I don't think that this is any longer about money, because with fiat currency they can just add zeros onto bank balances whenever they like. They can create money out of thin air, and they do. So I actually think this, when they take money from us, that it's actually more about hurting us to make life harder for us to survive. And this again slips into the Loosh Farm theory, where if we're constantly paying more tax and we're sent a fine in the post for something, we're struggling to make ends meet, we're having to make bad choices with the food that we consume, then that all leads to anxiety, and ultimately, can affect our mental health and leave us in a state of fear constantly, and worry. And that again feeds them. And I think that is their reward. That is what they're after. It's not our money. It's taking our money from us and making life hard for us, so they can then feed off of that negative energy, because that is what they need. So I think that that's ultimately what this is really all about. And with regard to the Earth itself, I think that we live on something that represents, I agree, it's more than likely, in my mind, a donut, and that the North Pole is probably where we should be looking far closer, because we're told to look up for UFOs, when I think we need to look down. And
I think that too.
Well, I think everything's inverted.
I think the sea is space down there.
Yes.
And what we see up there is it's I don't know.
Whatever. I think if we're told to, we're constantly talking about the ice wall, what's going on in Antarctica, Admiral Byrd and so on, as you said, went to the North Pole too. I think because we're pushed to look south, that we should be doing the reverse, and really perhaps the focus is the north.
Yes, the Indo-Aryans, the Slav-Aryans, their celestial home was the north. It's all about the north,
You mentioned Ireland earlier on as well.
Yeah.
High Brazil. High Brazil is another island off the coast of Ireland that just disappeared and was said to be extremely advanced.
This one, yes. Is it the one that they see every 7 years? Or is
That's
it
right.
Gone now?
Yeah, apparently. Yes, I don't know if they still do now, but they did, and it would only appear for a very short period of time for them to conduct business, and then it would go back under the water again.
Yeah, there's so much under the water, so much, and that's why I think it's all under the water. More craft come out of the water and they go from the sky. And I have stared at the sky and done meditations connected with all of that. I don't read anything from it. Yes, there's a consciousness, definitely, but everything is consciousness. But there's nothing there, And
Reminds me of a mobile that you would put above a cot, a child's cot, that you wind up and then it just rotates. It reminds me of that. It's just something that we're looking at.
And it is a map. It definitely is a map. It's a map of the ages, but that's it. And it's part of our sphere, our realm. So Earth is not this sort of round thing. Earth includes the sky, It's all part of this realm. When you look at the zodiac, which is in every single culture, there's got to be something in that. The different eras, the zodiac.
I think it was used to measure periods of time and ages, but I think for me, it's more likely to be something that is no longer there. They say that by the time the light reaches us, so we can see what is a star, that it may have died millions of years ago. So I think it's almost like an old photograph we're seeing of a map or something that enabled us to operate some kind of calendar or understand periods of time and predict events that will happen that reoccur, and that's all we're seeing. And of course then you've got the moon to throw into that, which doesn't rotate in the way a planet should. It just appears to turn like a wheel almost. And sometimes I look at it and I just see a reflection of the earth, and I think, well, what I'm looking at appears to have continents. So am I looking at a holographic projection, a mirror image of the earth? What actually is it? And is the whole did we land on the moon or didn't we, is that just misdirection? So we can worry about, did they make it there or not? Were they turned away by some beings that were on there? What really happened? Well, what if it's not really a thing at all, and we're just looking at a hologram? So, like I said, with the sort of with so many things, we're kind of given two options, aren't we? Like with the Earth, we're really given, is it flat or is it a spinning ball? But I actually believe it's a donut, a ring donut. And so I kind of think with the moon, is it an alien base? Some people think that it was actually put into position, that it's metallic, and NASA fired something at it and it echoed for 3 days as an experiment. But what if there's another option? When we're just given two choices, perhaps the truth is something that we're not aware of. They give us these two things, like the story of creation. Did we evolve, as Darwin suggests, through the origin of species, or were we created in the image of the gods or a supreme being? Just those two options we're presented with. Well, what if there's a third? And I think that that's the case with so many things. The third option is something that's never presented to us, that we stumble across, and then you throw it out there to the world, and you're immediately shut down because it's so unbelievable.
Yeah, well, the Cree people, who I think are part of the Hopi, they said that we manifested ourselves into being. Edgar Cayce said we manifested ourselves into being. If we think about the Numu created this physical, biological form to house the soul, the spirit. My gut feeling is that we were not created by the Anunnaki. So we have either created ourselves, or the Numu, which we are essentially, the physical form was created to house the soul for us to have an experience. And whether that was created as a physical, biological thing, or whether we simply manifested ourselves into being to become physical, like the sort of dematerialization and materialization, I think it's about that. And I do feel that Sitchin was also a gatekeeper as well. Just before he died, he actually said that he had been continuously connecting with the Anunnaki all along. So I found that interesting, actually.
Oh, I was just going to say it's interesting because I've been chatting to a guy called Michael Lee Hill, and he was a remote viewer for the NSA.
He's Enki's reincarnation of Enki.
Apparently so he believes, yeah. And I found him absolutely fascinating to talk to. Some people think that he's bang on the money, and other people think that he's not. And he actually is R.H. Null.
Yes.
Yeah, he's Eric Clapton's illegitimate son. Yeah, and I found him really fascinating, and approached by the NSA. Originally, I think he was working with some government agency, and it was his medical. He had a medical, and a blood test was part of that. And that is when they discovered he was R.H. Null, and he wasn't aware. And then they said, we would like you to become a remote viewer. And once he started talking with other people, especially online, about what he was doing, that's when he became unstuck, and he was literally almost beaten to death and had to have reconstructive surgery.
Yes,
Yeah,
I remember.
almost blinded. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We're just not allowed to talk about this stuff, are we? We're not allowed to get this. And I feel that that's white hats and black hats doing that. And when I say white hats and black hats, and I know that triggers so many people, but it's like positive, negative, dark, good,
Yeah.
however we want to view it, we obviously, I don't know, it's just not the right time yet, but I do feel it's coming, definitely the right time is coming, that everything is, all cards are going to be laid, that they're being laid on the table.
I don't know about you, but I've struggled with my memory for a very long time because I had it fried by the NHS about 10 years ago. But so I always used to write things down, and everybody used to laugh that I always had a notebook. Even when I was younger, one of my oldest friends, he used to say, "Guy will always have a notebook with him and a handkerchief in his pocket, always. And if he says he's going to meet you at a specific time, he will be there at exactly that time. If he's late, it will be somebody else's fault." And he's got these things about me that he always comes out with. But my ability to retain information is definitely getting worse, and I'm having to write everything down now, and I'm surrounded by notepads and scraps of paper, and that's why I wrote my first book, because I had all these notes and I wanted to put it into some sort of order, and I didn't know if anybody would ever buy it, but I had to do it for me before the notes no longer made any sense because they jumped from one thing to another. And I had to sort of unravel it all to put it into some sort of sense so it flowed better. Because my notes would be one moment I'm talking about Genghis Khan, the next minute I'm talking about airships, and then I'm talking about something else. And I had to put that all into the chapters and order. And I'm certainly taking on more and more information all the time, as we all are. But at the same time, I'm having to make more and more notes. And now I've got a note board where I'm pinning things to it and I'm texting myself. Don't forget to read that note. I got things in my diary that I shouldn't need to put in there, reminders of things. And I think it's a combination of what happened to me about 10 years ago and also information overload, that we're all being bombarded with so much more information now that it's difficult to be able to retain it. Or I know it's in there somewhere, but our ability to actually recall it at any given moment on demand is very, very difficult.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I wonder if the chemtrails got something to do with that. But I also, what you say about information overload, that's actually very interesting, because I do research, I do channeling, meditation, it's all information coming into the brain. And I do think that our brain, the filters in our brain were originally created so that we didn't get overload, but everything has just been sort of altered. And I wouldn't be surprised if it hadn't just been altered in the past 120 years, actually, because something, as we know, something changed in the 1700s. The 1800s is sort of the 100 years where they started sort of just rebranding it all. And then the 1900s seems to be just this sort of like total brain wiping, memory wiping, just wiping everything off, so that we're moving into this new era, which is all going to be, like the space age and AI. We're not even sort of going to be what we were 200 years ago anymore. We're literally becoming a completely new human. And whether that's positive or negative, I think it depends who's running the show.
I agree. I think that what we're now becoming is a civilization that are dependent upon AI in lots of different respects. Whether we're using AI for tasks that we used to do ourselves, and that even down to an automated phone call, where you're given options to press this, press that, or talk into it. That replaced someone who once sat on a reception or a customer service desk. So I think that AI is being used for the wrong reasons. It's replacing human beings with computers or tech, where we used to be able to have a conversation with someone who was, perhaps you would like to hope in most cases, showed some form of empathy towards us and was able to understand why we were calling and put us through to the right department. Where now we've got options and the one you want isn't present, so they end up cutting the call because you can't press the number because nothing relates to it. But also at the same time, we are now getting AI to do things for us. So instead of having to read a book and do some research, we can just ask ChatGPT, for example, about something to save us doing the work. And then, of course, the information we're presented with might just be what we are supposed to be told. And then we can say, okay, well, I've looked into that, and this is the answer, and these are the theories, but these theories have all been debunked according to ChatGPT. And you tick a box and think, well, I didn't have to look into that for myself. I got ChatGPT to do it. But the information it's giving us is highly unlikely to be anything other than what the mainstream wants us to see or read. So I think that is the problem. We're going to have people who consider themselves to be experts on a particular subject that actually haven't studied that at all. They're getting ChatGPT to do it. So it's making us lazy. At the same time, it's feeding us particular narratives. It's never going to come up and say, actually, we never landed on the moon. Actually, there were things within the COVID vaccine that were harmful and they knew, and this was the real purpose. It's never going to do that. So I think it's kind of making us a civilization that's a little bit lazy, where we no longer have to do our homework, and force feeding us narratives that stop us being able to consider alternatives.
That's so interesting. I'm reading at the moment, I've got Credo Mutwa's book, and he's the one that I think spoke to David Icke, did he? Is it Credo Mutwa?
Oh no, I don't recognize the name.
Oh, maybe that's a different one then. Anyway, he talks about how the first civilization was wiped out because they became lazy. They were given everything that they would ever need. And because of it, they became lazy, and literally they ended up just sort of lying down like big lumps and just not doing anything, just getting other things to do it for them. And so they were a wiped out civilization. It was destroyed because it was deemed that it hadn't worked. And then the next civilization was created. And it's so interesting how all the indigenous tribes talk about civilization being destroyed and then recreated again. All of them.
The story of the Great Flood appears everywhere.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah. And you look at what Graham Hancock went through when he started talking about the Younger Dryas period. He was destroyed. The Guardian newspaper, lots of publications targeted him for what he said. And 5 minutes later, it's all confirmed that what he was saying is exactly that period of time, and what happened. Whilst removing Atlantis from it, everything he said has now been scientifically proven, as much as we can trust science, to have actually taken place exactly when he said he did. But I didn't see any apologies given to him, and that's the problem, isn't it? You put your head up above the parapets and you become a target. And I think that you've got to be quite brave to do that, and at the same time kind of thick-skinned, because you know what's coming. And as I said to you earlier on, I block and delete. I used to engage with people that now I realize aren't capable of waking up. And my wife kept saying to me that, why are you spending so much of your time trying to convince somebody that's not listening? You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's funny because I gave a talk in Derby on Friday night, and a couple of people, when I told them certain bits of information about how they got rid of the previous civilization, the fact that bodies were used from the Napoleonic Wars as fertilizer, which isn't a conspiracy theory. It's well documented that the remains were shipped back to Britain and used in fertilizer for crops. And when somebody said, what happened to the previous civilization? I said, well, within Europe, unfortunately, indirectly, we ate them. And we used teeth from the Battle of Waterloo. They became the most sought after dentures you could use. We used their bones to make bone china. So we were eating with their teeth on a plate made from their bones, and crops grown from their remains. And one person went, oh my God, that's disgusting. And I said, as the surgeon said to the patient, I didn't make the scalpel sharp. I'm giving you information that's shocking, but I'm not the cause of what happened.
I didn't.
Yeah, so some of my work, I suppose, is nightmare fuel. If you're asleep, then you'll either read it and have bloody nightmares, or you would read it and think, well, I don't believe any of that, because I've not seen that on the BBC's website.
You do have to have that drive to be able to sort of do this. And I think it comes from within, honestly.
Yes.
I would rather be doing anything else than this, but I feel like it's what I came here to do,
I
we
know
must
what
have
you
come
mean.
here to do that. We must have.
I have this conversation all the time with people that it wasn't until I was really in my late 40s that I fully understood why I'm here. I originally thought that my role on this earth was to make somebody, obviously having been a tattooist for a long time and then specializing in sort of scar cover up, and I did mastectomy scars and so on, and people that had had traumatic experiences, and a tattoo was their way of saying I survived. I kind of realized that it wasn't about creating this beautiful Japanese sleeve on someone. It was actually about changing someone's life for the better, so when they looked in the mirror, they were no longer ashamed or trying to hide something, and to make them feel more confident, and to watch them smile. And a couple of times when I'd worked on ladies that had had mastectomies, seeing them in the mirror, their reaction when they saw what I'd done, I would just stand there and cry. and I'd bawl my eyes out, and they were hugging me, and then they'd send me a photograph of them on topless on holiday. They look what I did, Guy. I've hidden myself for 10 years. I've not had a relationship, and now look, I'm on holiday on the beach and I'm topless. And I was like, oh, wow, this is, people, women of all ages. And I thought that that was my job, and that's what I was supposed to do, trying to train to become an architect and then becoming a graphic designer that led me into tattooing. I discovered my purpose, and it was to make people smile when they looked in the mirror and feel more confident. And the people that were bullied at school, by putting tattoos on them, so they became the people that you would cross the road to avoid. All of a sudden, this timid little person that had spent most of their childhood being bullied and picked on by everybody, now had a few tattoos. Now they were edgy. They were no longer going to be bullied. They were now confident. I got tattoos and they hurt. You're going to cross the road from me this time. And it was kind of empowering for people. And I thought that was it. But at the same time, I was taking them down the rabbit hole without realizing it. They would sit in the chair and I would put bit shoots on and say, oh, you've got to watch this documentary on human cloning. Or you've got to watch this on the moon landings. You've got to watch this. Everybody that came in, I was sending them down rabbit holes. What I was trying to do was share something with people I thought was interesting. And at the same time, I was getting to listen to it again. But some would leave thinking, my God, I'm going to look into that. That's amazing. And other people would walk out saying, well, I don't believe any of that. And I kind of realized what I was doing was trying to wake people up without knowing I was doing that. I was just trying to distract them. But it was then that I realized, actually, I'm not supposed to be doing the tattoo part. This bit's more important. And, here I am now. I haven't tattooed for 18 months now, nearly. And here I am trying to wake more and more people up, knowing that 50% of the time I'm banging my head off a wall. And the other 50% of the time, I'm engaging with people that say, thanks for that. That just filled in that last puzzle. Or that just connected another dot. And I think, okay, that is what I'm supposed to do. But it can take you a long time. Some people will pass on, never knowing why they were here and what they were supposed to do. And I guess, although it took me 50 years to find out, I should be grateful for the fact that I did find out.
Yes, oh, likewise, yes. I have sort of a similar story to you, really. This whole truth-seeking, conspiracy, searching for truth. I was born with this, It's been running through my entire life, but it took until my 40s to find it. And you're right, before then, I felt like I was here to help others, like help people find their joy, their full potential, and I still do energy healing with people because there is a part of me that wants to help others, and I will always have that. But yeah, it's the truth seeking. And maybe this sort of waking people up, this maybe then, because this is such an important part of who we are, maybe this is telling us that we do need to wake people up, that people do need to wake up. And it is because there is something coming. And what is coming, the ones who are awake and ready to move on, they will move on. And it's now trying to wake up as many people as we possibly can, not from a place of fear, but from a place of love.
I agree. We've had this conversation before, haven't we? And I totally agree with that. And I there's no way everybody can come. And I think that even the prospect of that, of what you've just said, is going to be quite frightening for people, that something's going to happen. I believe that they're allowing what's going on right now to take place. We're seeing clearly, a staged war that's really ultimately is the catalyst for pushing us further into 15-minute cities, because it's going to restrict movement. If we can't afford to fuel the car, and we'll see goods increase because of the cost of transportation increasing, and flights increase, which will reduce the amount of times people will be able to go away, if they go away at all. So I think it's a big push into the 15-minute cities, and I think this is all being allowed to take place because ultimately they're going to see who goes along with it and who resists, just like we had in 2020, and they'll whittle it down to a number of people and say, okay, you're ready to see what's next, or to join us as we perhaps go into a higher frequency again, or even a different dimension. And the people that can't be woken up, it would be too overwhelming for them. If, something being approached them and said, it's your time, they might reach for a knife from the kitchen drawer and try and sort of, attack it. Whereas I would go running towards it, saying, I've been bloody waiting for you. What took you so long to get it? Do you know what I mean? I think it's a very different mindset.
Yeah. I also am beginning to wonder, and it's because I'm exploring Inner Earth at the moment, but I'm also beginning to wonder if Inner Earth is going to open up, and there are many people who'll be able to go into Inner Earth, which is, I think, a higher dimension, because it doesn't compare to being inside an Earth. It has a
Yes.
sky internal, it has a sun, it has green trees. We can't really call that inner. So it's another dimension.
I was just going to say, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What if what we're floating on is flat? But what if what we're floating? Yeah, but just for an argument's sake, and I'm not saying this is the case, but just for a moment, let's say that we live on this and we're wandering around here, and then you go through here, and this is the other world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just a flip of this.
But I do feel that reality, it's multidimensional. It's a multidimensional field, and there's different vibrations, frequencies, dimensions, because there's infinite frequencies. So my 3D brain, is trying to grasp this understanding of multidimensionality and seeing it, like little sort of round bubbles everywhere. We move between them through portals, and I think that's what is happening now. Our consciousness is expanding to encompass more of reality, more of the true nature of reality. And so what we call inner earth, doesn't even have to be a thing. It's a vibration. And in some meditations, I've connected with people from other worlds, and I do think that they were other worlds, but they are of a different vibration frequency to us. But in their world, they're physical beings. But in our world, they wouldn't be physical beings because they're of a very different vibration frequency to us. And I feel that that is how it's all working. But we can't explain that properly. We don't have the science to understand or to explain that. There are 270 references in the Bible, I believe, to arcs saving people at various points in time when there are catalytic events, which we can see there's been many catalytic events. The inner earth, I think that there are entrances to inner earth all over the place. I think there's some in Devon.
When you say Devon, is there anywhere in particular that you think there might be one?
Yeah, I'll show you.
Okay.
Let's go explore.
Yes. I just had a vision there. It's weird. As soon as you said that, I just saw myself, Farina, and our little dog Arthur walking through it.
Okay.
I could see it clear as day.
Yeah.
It's really strange.
So I'm gonna let you go. I love talking to you, and let's meet up and we'll go portal hunting.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I'd love to. Yeah, thank you for having me back on.
I know, it's great. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you soon. All right.
Thank you, and you.
Take care.
And you. Bye bye.